Hello, and welcome to the Week 6 edition of CastCast, where I am your host, Casty Streeter, and a plethora of interesting games this last weekend. If there was anybody that wagered on, our remaining undefeated teams to lose, they're probably very happy campers, to say the least. But, looking ahead, you guys, to this week, I think that, I think this next week is going to be fun too. Some interesting games, just barely glancing over. But of course, looking at the games from last week, I'm just going to kind of go over this, giving you know, my 5 cents over it. And that'll be it. Starting off with Thursday, Broncos against the Chiefs at Arrowhead. I'll say this. The Broncos limited the Chiefs way more than I would have ever expected them to. I'm pretty sure I had predicted a game where, the Chiefs score a ton and, potentially the Broncos score, more than 8 at least. But goodness, the Chiefs don't look anything like the team that they were last year. Methodical, crafty, just incredibly hard to prepare for with how Mahomes plays the game. But goodness, the one highlight I'll say about the Chiefs is that Rice looks like he's the real deal on this team. And they still have plenty of weapons, I guess, for Mahomes to get it to that can, go around the field. But it seems like this is a Chiefs offense that really misses that it factor in the end zone. Sure, they have Kelsey, who had an amazing first half, but if he's got more yards than the entire Broncos offense did in the first half, why are you having such a hard time scoring? Essentially, in this game, that's just kind of my 5 cents. But the Broncos, boy, did they look like fools this game. Russell Wilson looks like he's not playing smart. He's not making good throws. There's just not that much to really say about, what the Broncos did in this game, besides the fact that they limited points. Yeah, sure, the Chiefs were getting yards and they were driving on them, but if you have a defense that is a really good red zone defense, I don't care about the yards. I care about the limitation on, points given up. And if they're only giving up field goals to a team like the Chiefs, then maybe this Broncos team can turn it around. And if their offense actually kicks it up, maybe they can actually play well. But they have an incredibly hard schedule coming up. Like, I think one of the hardest in the NFL in the weeks to come. I don't remember who they play, but, next week they go against my Packers. And I'm not going to say that that's going to be like a challenging game. Like, my Packers have had their own struggles, but the Broncos, God, it's mind-boggling to me how inconsistent they are and how troubled this team is. That's my 5 cents on that. Ravens Titans. Ravens looked like they just handled the Titans, in this game, winning by 8 over and across the pond. I didn't watch the game, but overall it just kind of, it kind of looks to me like the Titans, and with the injury to Tannehill, like they're just going to struggle a lot more. I've never been a really big believer in Tannehill except for maybe like a few years ago. Like, he's been on the steady decline, with his play and how well he does. You can say that, he's lost weapons and he's having to work with all these new guys, a lot, and especially, getting rid of AJ Brown before last season wouldn't help, but it's almost no excuse when you're a veteran QB. And, who knows? The Titans look like they're destined to just have a really bad, and, I'm not going to say end of the season because we're obviously only 1/3 through, but yeah, it doesn't look good for them. Moving on to Commanders Falcons, I'll say this. I predicted that the Commanders would, potentially win this game, and Sam Howell looked like he had a really good rebound game after getting, pressured and very limited against the Bears on Thursday night the week before. I think that the Commanders are a team that have some really good pieces. They almost, in terms of their defense, they almost remind me a little bit of they remind me of the Niners. Obviously not as dominant, because they don't have a pass rusher that's as good as Nick Bosa, but having Chase Young and Montez Sweat and Daron Payne, who, can all force pressure on any given play, makes this defensive front really formidable. And they lined up well against the Falcons. I think that the Falcons, and showing that when they had to throw with Ritter, he just was not it. And I mean, the rumors around the Falcons is that, they were potentially going to be in the market for Kirk Cousins, but he's not going to waive his no trade clause, apparently. I can see why. Potentially bring in Cousins for the rest of the year and hopefully have Ritter learn from him. Even though I don't think Cousins is the best teacher, but he definitely plays better than Ritter does right now. And I mean, upside is only going to keep you as the starter for so long. If you keep making the same mental errors and throwing picks upon picks, that's a really quick way to get out of the league. But yeah, the Commanders matching up well and doing well against the Falcons. Good game for Sam Howell. Vikings Bears, I watched this game quite a bit. I thought it was a very, very ugly game. You look at this and you look at the Bears and you look at Fields, and the way he was playing and the way he was getting pressured, and then him getting injured and the rookie QB for the Bears coming in. And now there's a lot of rumors around maybe this kid should start, and it's like, goodness, talk about Fields, getting kind of the stanky leg, in terms of how much, disrespect he gets. And it's like, you kind of knew that it's like they weren't going to win a ton of games in a row after their win against the Commanders the previous week. And it's like the Vikings, even though they're not that great of a team and they definitely had their own issues, and they just seemingly eked out of it. I did say that I thought that the Bears could win this game because Jefferson was out, but I didn't think that, the Vikings, they were just going to be nothing without Jefferson. Granted, it was still a struggle and it was still, I mean, goodness, not a pretty game at all. A W is a W, and the Vikings, I'm sure, are happy to have it, but I'm sure there's a lot to look and clean up because if they were against any semi-competent team, they probably lose this game. Now looking at the Seahawks visiting the Bengals in Ohio, this game was actually a really good game. I thought that both teams played really well. The Seahawks defense definitely lived up to the expectation of Witherspoon and Woolen. The Bengals were definitely limited and they were definitely getting pressure. Burrow was definitely getting pressure on himself. Geno Smith himself as well. He's definitely like neither QB insanely mobile enough to scramble if need be, but both QBs under duress this game, thus I think why it was such low scoring. But Geno Smith making some beautiful throws and then not so beautiful throws. I remember, Lockett was having a game, he was doing really well doing Lockett things. I even remember the basket catch throw that, Geno threw was really, beautiful pass because it was in between like two defenders and, impeccable timing on that, where it's like, you need the timing and you need the arm talent as well. But overall on the sideline there, the Bengals, though, etching out the win. The Seahawks, I think, just couldn't protect Geno well enough, to be honest with you. And I think the Bengals protected Burrow a little bit better. But that's my take on that game. I thought for sure that the Seahawks were honestly going to win this game with the amount of firepower that they have on offense. But they seemingly just couldn't find the answer offensively, in my opinion. I think the defense played fine. Whenever you give up only 2 TDs and, a field goal, I mean, you feel awfully good about your defense. This game, 49ers at the Browns, I had said that I thought the Browns, the way that they would win this game, 49ers visiting the Browns in Cleveland. Maybe, it was a good day for Ohio, and stuff like that, that sort of thing. Maybe Ohio gave its blessing to the boon of, the Browns and the Bengals, type of thing. But this game, I openly said that I thought the Browns coming off a bye, having 2 weeks to prepare, essentially mentally and physically for the 49ers, which is kind of what you need. The Niners being a very physical team, we all know their front seven. We all know their offense is very tough. McCaffrey's tough, Debo's tough, Kittle's tough. The only guy that I really don't consider like tough maybe on their offense is Ayuk, but even Ayuk, is, adds a nice compliment that he's slippery, he's a good route runner, catcher, and good after the catch. There's just not very many things that obviously the Niners don't do well, and then it's like the Browns without Deshaun Watson, they have, PJN, to play. And essentially, they were saying on how, he's like the third string QB or whatever for this team and whatever else. But he played fine. I definitely think there were some things he got away with. The Niners did obviously play still very well on defense. I think the offense struggled because obviously McCaffrey, went out later than Debo did, but Debo did not come back, thus affecting their offense, which is what I've said, is it's like this team's good on the Niners, but, you start to lose pieces and it becomes a little bit easier. It becomes immensely easier because of how good each of their starters is on like the offensive side and then in the front seven on the defensive side. But kudos to the Browns. I think they held up really well. I think that they showed that they are, finally coming along as a team. I've said that, the Browns on paper have been very talented, for years now, and obviously with the quarterback change, they had, the last, full-time starter that they had technically was Baker, and they moved on from him just because of the rift between them for whatever reason. And then they went after Deshaun Watson, but their defense has always been really good. Myles Garrett, arguably, I would give him a slight edge over Nick Bosa because I think that he's been on a defense where it's like, sure, they have a good amount of talented players, but he doesn't have as much of a defensive front and linebacker core as good as the Niners do in order to back Bosa up and in order to use Bosa in the scheme that they use. Granted, they're both top tier players, but in terms of ends, I think that, Garrett holds the edge a little bit over Bosa. Hot take. It's kind of pick your poison because they're both, elite tier, top tier, at this point, first ballot Hall of Famers probably type of thing with pass rushing. But the Browns, they got it done. And I mean, people that are being shocked and acting like the Niners lost against some terrible team, I don't know how you can say that. Like they got Purdy off of his undefeated pedestal, type of thing. And they knocked a very solid team that, they were obviously prepared for. So good job for the Browns. And, we'll see how well they do going forward because I feel like they are definitely, they're obviously 3-2. They were obviously 2-2 coming into this game, a 500 team, but this team could be very good and very dangerous moving forward, especially if they can get Watson back and he can actually, stay healthy and hopefully start performing at a consistent level because a lot of inconsistency from him when he was playing. Moving on to this game, Saints Texans. I think that, CJ Stroud has, proven beyond a doubt that he is the guy. Very tough, very capable, and just did very well, and Nico Collins, I'm not going to lie, I think this was the first game that I paid a lot more attention to the Texans while they were on, watching, having however many games on my computer, type of thing. But CJ Stroud really kind of proved that he can be that guy. And then even the Texans defense, it reminds me a lot, of course, of the Niners, but then again, their head coach came from the Niners as their D coordinator last year. And he's brought that winning culture along with him, and he's definitely a coach I could see in the league for a long time. They essentially went kind of all in on this draft with Stroud and then Anderson, but those were obviously two at least cornerstone players, if not they're already kind of proven to be, star players on any given team. But the Saints, it looked rough. Alvin Kamara not really getting going, just an overall, I think that, they definitely had some success on offense, but it was very, very limited, obviously, only being able to score one touchdown. And, kind of unfortunate for them, but their division is very tight knit. And the Texans at this point, they're trailing behind Jacksonville, who we'll be talking about here in a second. This was a game I definitely predicted very, very wrong on. I thought that because Minshew kind of brought a calm demeanor and kind of a meticulous playing style where he's going to manage, I thought that would be kind of the method that they would be using, where it's like they're going to kind of play with many different options of who to throw it to scheme open type of thing. But the Jaguars still continue to have the number of the Colts. And obviously it doesn't help that this was in Florida, in Jacksonville, but the Colts just didn't show up this game, and the Jaguars, if they keep playing like this, I do think that, they can definitely be considered a contender come playoff time. But they need to be able to prove that they can finish games and not have the little mistakes that, make them lose games like they did against the Chiefs, where ultimately they had a chance to beat and, knock off, the Chiefs, whom obviously have looked out of sorts this year, but the Jaguars have to win those games because come playoff time, that's all that there is the win or the loss. This was an interesting game, Panthers-Dolphins. I know that the Panthers had scored 14 unanswered early in the game, and then they went, they scored 7 points to 42. The crazy thing is that the Dolphins, they obviously started off slow, but then they got blazing hot. I didn't ever expect, the Panthers to win, to be honest with you. You could kind of, even when they were up 14-0, you could see the nervousness on the coach's face when they showed on the sideline. Like, they weren't comfortable at all because they just know how good this Dolphins offense is. But yeah, not much to say here. You have a team that's winless, like the Panthers, and then a team like the Dolphins who, their only loss obviously coming to the Bills, which was a crushing loss, but have, had the really crazy off the hook offensive stats and scoring this year. But I think it, just to say this, I think that because the Panthers scored 14, I think that just shows other teams that the Dolphins defense is still vulnerable, and they really need, they really need to do something about it, because to have to put up, they obviously didn't have to put up too much, like 22 points or higher isn't that hard to achieve in today's NFL, especially with a Dolphins team like this. But their defense is liable, clearly. But that's all I'll say about that. Patriots Raiders. The Raiders coming off their second straight win in Las Vegas. The Patriots looking, scoring way more than they did the last 2 weeks. But overall, just kind of a scruffy game. Not much really to say. You got two teams like this where it's like the Raiders definitely didn't perform. I wouldn't say they didn't perform like a 500 team, but they barely beat out the Patriots, who have been abysmal this year. And it just kind of shows the inconsistencies with the Raiders. And that's all I'll really say about that. Lions, Buccaneers. I'll say this. I think the Lions, it's shocking that they actually held the Buccaneers to so few. I think that they did do really well against Baker and applying pressure type of thing. But I think the ultimate thing about this game that you have to take into account is the Buccaneers do have a pretty good defense. And they held, a Lions offense, which is the strength of their team, to 20 points. Some things to fix on offense, definitely, but I definitely expected Mike Evans to have a bigger game and for them to definitely be able to pass on this Lions defense, but only scoring 6 is a testament to the Lions. Not to say the Buccaneers have a crazy efficient offense or anything like that, but when you have a guy like Mike Evans who's such a mismatch and has been having a good year, I just don't really think that, you can ever think that this team is going to be limited so heavily, and you still have Godwin, and you still have, other weapons on this team. Looking at the Cardinals and the Rams, kind of started off close. The Rams, I believe, were losing early. The Rams, they scored 26-9. They held the Cardinals in check, I guess. They definitely kind of proved that, the Cardinals are definitely not that great of a team. The Cardinals are kind of looking less scrappier by the week. Maybe that's because teams are finally figuring out the unknowns. The unknowns with the Cardinals, because obviously, Hobbs is a young QB. How are they going to use him type of thing? But it's like the lack of talent on the Cardinals is going to ultimately, hurt them. And they can potentially, obviously, they're going to have a really high pick. And the Rams, Puka Nacua, we'll keep on saying it, very underrated, keeps on coming to play. I don't care what team it is across. It is not easy in the league to come in and week out. And then the return of Cooper Kupp, I believe, this game. But yeah, Cooper Kupp looked good. I believe he got a touchdown. But yeah, the tandem with Cooper Kupp and Puka, I think that the Rams can definitely be kind of a dark horse team, because they've seemingly rebounded their offense quite a bit. Eagles Jets. Now this is a crazy game. I thought for sure that there was no way in heck that the Eagles were gonna lose this game. The Jets, goodness, obviously the defense is the strength of it, but I don't know what to say other than that. Kudos to the Jets. The Jets, it's like I've been saying, we'll quickly look at this game. It's like I've been saying, but with the stats on this game, it's like you look at the Eagles and you look at Jalen Hurts, him throwing all these picks. Obviously, that's crazy, And then, here we have, Robert Saleh right here, but he said that they've tormented every QB they've played. If you can torment the QB on the other team, it's a good recipe for winning, assuming you don't have that great of a QB yourself. Not to say that Wilson isn't continuing to improve. This doesn't look like the most glorious stat line ever. But, the fact that they have kind of a running back by committee and they're running, the ball, a bit, I think that, you can make it by like this with a great defense. And obviously if a guy like Jalen Hurts, who it's like arguably, I wouldn't even say top 5, to be honest, no disrespect to him, but I think that there's better quarterbacks that are a bit more proven and haven't had just the success of 1 year, so to speak, that year being last year for Jalen Hurts. But Garrett Wilson having a good day. Breece Hall, they're definitely getting Breece Hall more incorporated, which I think they need to do, because Cook just doesn't look like the guy he was. And it's like, who knows if it's the way they're using him or whatnot. But yeah, the Eagles, crazy to me when you have, DeAndre Swift, obviously, who was one of the leading rushers in the league, and I'm sure he's probably still up there. But yeah, only 18 yards rushing. Obviously, the Jets have a very stout run D. You look at this and they have, Quincy Williams, Mosley, and, a lot of these guys, contributing for a lot of tackles and, several tackles for loss. But, Quinnen Williams, stuffing the middle. He's the kind of guy that, to me, it's like he's not going to have necessarily the most stat padding. But if he's not double team, he's going to take over the run game, and you're not going to be able to run the ball against a man like this, at least not up the middle. But the Jets, I still want to believe that they could still have, a pretty good season, but it's kind of we'll see how well their defense holds up, and that sort of thing. Moving on to the last game of the week, yesterday's game, Monday Night Football, the New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills. I think if you're looking at this game, you're thinking there's no shot that the Giants are going to do anything. They have obviously Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. I wouldn't say he's a terrible quarterback. I would say that he's one of the better backups in the NFL. He's more well-known. He's been in the league. He does provide a scrambling ability, which is rare for backups, type of thing. They're usually more the game manager types. But then you have the Bills who, nobody counted the Giants in this game. Nobody. And, the fact that Saquon plays, but he definitely didn't look 100%, obviously still having a pretty decent game. But then them not relying on him when essentially they got a pass interference call that brought them to the one with a chance to win it. A chance to win it. Obviously, you see this score and they're down by 5, so they needed a touchdown. But yeah, a touchdown with 6 would have won this game without an extra point, and they were on the 1 yard line, which I just find crazy. And, you have contributors across the board, which is something I think you need with a team like this, where it's like your best threat overall is Darren Waller. Then you have the young Jalen Hyatt, who's their burner. And then you have Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, who are kind of your guys that can make these clutch sideline catches or catches in space. Like Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty good in open space. But, Tyrod Taylor obviously losing a fumble in this game, having a fumble. Sorry. But yeah, it kind of is a testament to me that this team was able to play as well as they were. You look at this and they weren't even really able to get to Josh Allen, but they were able to limit this team to 15 points or 14. I'm sorry. But the Bills, crazy enough, it's like 2 TDs and an interception from Allen, obviously enough to win. Cook having a good day. I think he honestly needs to get used more. I think that this running back by committee, I wouldn't say is hurting Buffalo, but I think that Latavius Murray is a lot more situational, short yardage, whereas James Cook has more of that flash, like we see from Dalvin Cook, obviously, in the past before this year. But Diggs still having a tremendous night, but then no other real production from anybody. Everybody else 25 yards and less. Obviously, you get some of these guys that only were targeted once, by Allen, and they do have to be thrown the ball to have a chance to catch it. But Gabe Davis with only 3 catches off of 4, And, Dawson Knox with 3 receptions off of 6 targets. I just think that you really need to get, more guys incorporated. Like Diggs is great. Don't get me wrong. He's a great wide receiver. I still think he's borderline a little bit underrated. Granted, he does have one of the better QBs in the league to make it a little bit easier on him. But this game was a lot closer than I think, anybody would have ever thought. And I think it was the first game back for Von Miller. And obviously, you look here and you don't see him in the stat column. Maybe he had a snap count type of thing. He's the kind of guy that I can see if the defense keeps performing well enough, where obviously they only had 2 sacks. But, if the defense keeps performing well enough, I'm sure that the Bills are going to realize that they want the postseason Von Miller. And if they can obviously, the thing about it is right now is that they obviously have to play the Dolphins one more time, and they are a game behind technically right now. But you never know in the AFC how tight it's going to be come playoff time, for a guy like that to come and start making an impact. Because Von Miller's a great player, but if he's not on the field, it's going to cripple your team. And it looks like this team is getting a little bit better in terms of a pass rush, a little bit. Granted, they were up against the Giants, but the Giants, they did a lot better pass blocking tonight than I think that, they had been doing the rest of the year, which, I'm sure a fire has been lit under them with how bad their, pass blocking is, because you cannot be a winning franchise or win any sort of games if you don't protect your QB at all. Like, we're just in that era where it's like you have to protect the QB to an extent to give him a chance to make a play. But yeah, that's my 5 cents on the Giants and the Bills. And yeah, it was overall to me like crazy how close this game was. And the fact that the Giants had a shot to win it is just kind of mind-boggling. I think the Bills have a lot to fix. And their offense still stutters. But overall, that's kind of those are my thoughts and opinions on last week's games. Obviously, we had several, bye weeks teams on buys, this last week, but looking ahead, we're obviously going to be looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are going to the Superdome in New Orleans. And I think this is an interesting game. Personally, what I think, with this is that, they say that the Saints, interestingly enough, are, they're favored in this game. I'm not sure why. I think that the Jaguars ultimately can win this game, a couple of days from now. I think that they obviously handled a team like the Colts. And I mean, the Colts, don't get me wrong, have looked, better than what most would assume, through 6 weeks of the season, but with their record being 500. But the Saints, kind of the same thing. I think that, they could potentially be better, or should be. I think that it's kind of, crazy looking back that I look at my Packers team, a team that came back from 17. They were down quite a bit and had to score 2 touchdowns to beat this New Orleans team. But it's interesting because I think that, the Saints defense is looking like, potentially they're being kind of figured out. It's not like teams are putting a ton of points on them still, because they're still going to be pressuring the QB quite a bit. But I think that Jacksonville will struggle, don't get me wrong. I think the main thing with the reason why New Orleans struggled against the Texans this last week was because the Texans have a really good O-line. I think it's very underrated. You have Laramie Tunzel, who obviously they traded for many years ago because he was one of the best, young left tackles in the league at the time. And it was like, oh yeah, let's trade for Tunzel to protect, Deshaun Watson years ago, with the Texans. And then, the rest of their O-line has allowed an abysmal amount of pressures, which I wouldn't say is the only reason why Stroud is looking good. Like, you still have to be able to make the throws, make correct reads, and all of that. And he's doing it with very limited weapons. The Jaguars, I would say, have, better weapons, but I would also say that they don't have as good of an O-line. I think that ATN is having a good season. He's got 51 yards through 6 games, not mind blowing or anything like that. But I think that, Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley are both, doing really well. And it's the kind of system where Trevor Lawrence is going to be distributing the ball all around the field. I think it's kind of crazy that he's got, 3 interceptions to only 7 TDs at this point, but obviously his completion percentage, is pretty high, good amount of yards, and overall he's playing really well and playing a lot better, I think, than he has in previous years. And he doesn't have the inconsistencies where it's like you have these games where it's like, oh, you're not getting it to anybody. Moving on to the Saints, obviously we have Derek Carr completing a little bit less of a passing percentage with less yards. Granted, he did miss like half a game, against the, my Packers or whatever. And then Alvin Kamara coming back, and obviously, within 2 games he's been back. Almost 100 yards each game. That's good off of 52 yards. Obviously, that's really good. I think that Jacksonville is very much built against the run. That's why, last week, ultimately, Jonathan Taylor struggled a bit and they just weren't able to really run it against the Jaguars, but looking at this game, I personally think that, maybe, and now that I'm actually thinking about it, I do think that New Orleans should be the favorite in this game. I think Jacksonville is coming off of way more momentum, having won their last 2, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, let's just look at that really quick. Let's just look at their schedule really quick. Obviously, I mean, the thing is that they did beat the Detroit Lions too earlier in the year. Or wait, this is no, I'm totally looking at the wrong thing. Their only loss, early that looked like kind of bad, a game that they should have won against the Chiefs, and obviously whooping the Colts week 1, closer game. But then they lost to the Texans, and the Texans, this was kind of a coming out game where it's like, goodness, they look really good. But you look at all these running teams, that they've played, and obviously the thing is that the Chiefs are a passing team, and so are the Texans, even though I think that their rookie is really good. But yeah, looking at the Colts, they're a running team. They overall just don't have that it factor in the passing game. And, looking at the Falcons, another running team who obviously the Ritter has its struggles, but then they have Bijan, who's obviously a beast, and just overall a very good running team. The Bills, I will say, is kind of a crazy thing. I think that this kind of went against the grain due to the fact that obviously the Bills, they couldn't run it this game, but I wouldn't define them as a running team, type of thing. And then at this, the thing about the New Orleans, looking at this, is that they can run the ball. Obviously, they have Taysom Hill, they have Kamara, and then they, I don't know if they're really incorporating their other guys really that much, with those two guys back, because they're the prime weapons in their run scheme type of thing. But New Orleans runs the ball in complements to their pass. I think that Carr does a really good job of option and, ultimately, choosing whether or not he's going to pass the ball type of thing because of what they do to prepare against the run. Because obviously, looking at New Orleans, you've got Olave and Thomas. And Thomas this year is finally kind of producing and not getting hurt type of thing. But Olave has, he looks, a bit faster. And I mean, he can still, jump high in the air and essentially just be out physical the most corners, because most corners aren't going to be able to jump, and be able to keep up with his speed and go up as high as he is for a ball. I'd like to see more from Olave. I'm not going to lie, through 6 games, but, and only 1 touchdown. But I think that this team primarily does like to use their running attack to get it into the end zone. I mean, obviously you see Carr through 6 weeks, only 5 TDs. That seems abysmally low, but they have had an offense that gets yards, but underperforms when they get in the red zone. I think that, obviously, near 1,300 yards, it's not bad through 6 weeks, but it's definitely I would say it's very average. A pretty good completion percentage. Obviously you have, Lawrence, I feel like, the more percentage it goes above, 65, the more elite you are. Like if you can have 7 out of 10 passes completed, if you're at like 70%, that is the attainable goal. I know a lot of QBs would want higher, but it's just not realistic, but this is a game where I think Jacksonville can come away with the upset. Obviously they, it's not even really that much of an upset. They're only, it's said to lose by 1 point, type of thing. But I think that they also have, I think another thing that comes into it is that they have, more reason to try and win this game, because looking at their division, look at the Texans, because obviously the Colts, because obviously the Colts, and then, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I can't remember the other team. Oh, and the Titans don't really throw me as the teams that are going to be competing late in the season. But the way the Texans are and the way that they're being coached, ultimately they're going to lock horns with the Jaguars late in the season, But the thing with New Orleans is that obviously, you're coming off of a disappointing loss where it's like, oh, you just can't perform offensively, type of thing. But I really think that Jacksonville pulls up the upset here. I think that, you look at Lawrence and you look at, their team. I think that they had a lot easier of a game on Sunday to win than the Saints. And that also plays a role in a shorter week, where I think that with an easier win against the Colts, I think that it's, they're going to be kind of riding that victory into Thursday night. And it's a short turnaround for the Saints, who looked like a disappointing team on Sunday. And they're not really playing that great of football right now. And it's like, I feel like if CJ Stroud was able to do good things against this, the Saints, then I think that the Jaguars can win this game. a point kind of prediction that I want to make here. I'm not going to go and look at the one up above right now. If they did post one, I guess I can't remember it. I think that the Jaguars can score 23 against the Saints 17 is what I would say. Because overall, I think the Saints are like a running team, and the Jaguars seemingly have a formula for stopping the run, against most teams. Teams that are running teams, and then teams that are also, they just, if you don't get any sort of run game going, I think it's going to be very tough on a team that has, clearly had success passing the ball with the Saints, but they ultimately, it's not their bread and butter. It's not what's going to win them games, So yeah, that's my final score prediction for the, Jacksonville visiting New Orleans. On a side note, I will say this. If the Saints get going because of their fans, then it might be a very different story for Jacksonville. But even then, I still think that they match up really well, and I think that, the run defense of Jacksonville is just way too stout. And even if that's the case, if the Saints, start to get the crowd involved in the Superdome, which is, a loud stadium, I still think that the Jaguars win by probably like 6 points, like 20-14 or something like that. But overall, those are kind of my predictions. I think that, predicting one score over, the course of the day game, if it was a neutral thing, is kind of odd, but because obviously there's factors that come into it that are out of the control of, and I mean it can swing momentum. But tell me what you think in the comments, and I hope you enjoy this video. Now back to the podcast. I kind of want to see if anybody wants to chat, to see if anybody has any input or any opinions on this game or any of the other games, that are going to be coming up this week. Obviously, I'm going to be on Saturday. I'm going to be doing my prediction for the rest of the games. It's way too early to tell with injuries and all of that, to see like who I should go with. But overall, I think that this Jacksonville Saints game could be a really close game, to be honest with you. Because I don't think either team is going to run away with the victory. But if nobody is going to, if nobody has any comments or anything like that, then I think that I'm going to check out. And going forward, I want to mention that the streams for reactions and the Thursday night preview are going to be happening on Tuesday. They're going to be happening on Tuesday, and the Wednesday streams are not going to be happening anymore. Wednesday is going to be a day that, unless, maybe I might upload a video Wednesday if something happens with the Thursday night matchup. But overall, I'm more than likely not going to be doing, Wednesday streams anymore. But I want to thank you guys for watching. I am your host, Casty Streeter, and we'll see you next time on CastCast.